On a Monday morning, while my daughter and her husband were vacationing in Hawaii, I asked a certified technician to inspect the backup battery system in the attic of the house that was still in my name. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. His voice was trembling. "Sir, there's a little boy hiding behind the backup battery unit." I raced across town, unlocked the attic door, and what I found behind that locked door made my knees buckle. Before we go any further, I'm genuinely grateful you're here. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. A quick note: this story contains some fictional elements crafted for storytelling and educational purposes. Names and places are coincidental, but every lesson inside it is worth keeping. That Monday morning started the way most of my mornings had started since I retired. Coffee going cold on the counter. The Oregonian spread out in front of me in the kind of quiet that either feels peaceful or lonely, depending on what mood you wake up in. I was 70 years old. I'd spent 40 years running into burning buildings for the Portland Fire Bureau, and now my biggest challenge was deciding whether to do the crossword before or after my second cup. Most days I didn't mind that. Most days the quiet was fine. I was on the weather page when my phone buzzed, not a call and alert. The little notification I'd set up 3 years ago when I had the solar system installed at my old place on Harlow Street. The app was called Solar Edge, and it connected to the Tesla Powerwall battery backup I'd had put in the attic room up top. The whole setup had cost me a pretty penny, but I'd wanted the house to be self-sufficient. Good investment, my installer said. Peace of mind, he called it. The alert read, "Battery backup offline inverter unreachable." I stared at it for a second. The inverter unit was mounted inside the finished attic room. That's where the certified technician had put it, said the space kept the temperature stable enough for the battery system to run efficiently. Made sense to me at the time. Now it just meant someone had to go up there and check it in person. My daughter Diane and her husband Ryan had been in Hawaii since Friday. 10 days at some resort on Maui that she'd been talking about for months. I didn't have a key to the house anymore. Diane had asked for it back about a year in. Said she felt weird knowing I could just walk in any time. I understood. It was her home now. I'd handed the key over without making a thing of it, but the house was still in my name. The deed, the utility accounts, the solar contract, all of it still had Frank Calloway printed at the top, which is why the alert came to me. I called Hector Alvarez at 8:52 that morning. Hector was a certified Tesla Powerwall technician who ran his own shop out of Northeast Portland. Good man, solid work, the kind of guy who showed up when he said he would. I'd met him years back through the fire station. We'd stayed in touch the way you do when you genuinely like somebody, but life keeps you both too busy to do much about it. He picked up on the second ring. "Frank, tell me you're calling about that fishing trip we keep putting off." "Not today," I said. "I need a favor. The Powerwall system at my daughter's house threw an error inverters offline. She's out of town. I need somebody to go take a look." "Where's the inverter?" "Finished attic room, top floor. You'd need to go inside." "I can do this morning if you've got a way to get me in." I gave him the address 2847 Harlow Street and told him Diane had one of those keypad garage doors. I still had the code because I paid the service subscription. Diane didn't know I still had it. I'd never used it. I told Hector the code and said to call me when he was done, that I'd sort out the bill with him later. "You're not going yourself?" he asked. "It's her house," I said. "I'll stay out of the way." Hector said he'd be there by 10:15 and we hung up. I went back to my crossword. Tried to anyway. I kept looking at the alert on my phone. Battery backup offline. There was no reason for that to bother me the way it did. Equipment fails. It happens. I put the phone face down and worked on 11 across. At 11:42 it rang. I saw Hector's name on the screen and picked up, expecting to hear him tell me it was a loose connection. Something simple, 20 minutes, and he'd have it sorted. Instead, I heard breathing. Just breathing for a second or two. The kind that tells you the person on the other end is trying to figure out how to say something they don't know how to say. Hector, Frank. His voice was wrong. I'd known Hector long enough to know what his voice sounded like when he was relaxed, when he was joking, when he was frustrated with a stubborn piece of equipment. This wasn't any of those. Frank, I need you to come here. Right now. My hand tightened around the phone. What happened? What's wrong? I went up to the attic room to check the inverter. I had to move a few storage boxes to get to the unit. And Frank, there's a kid up here. A little boy. He's living up here. He won't come to me. He won't talk to me. I don't know what to do. I need you here. I stood up so fast the chair scraped back against the kitchen tile. How old? I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. 40 years of emergency response will do that to you. The body keeps moving even when the mind hasn't caught up. I don't know. Young. Maybe 5, maybe 6. He's scared, Frank. He's hiding behind the inverter unit and he won't come out. Don't go near him, I said, already moving toward the door. Don't raise your voice. Don't rush him. Sit down somewhere he can see you on the floor if you can and just talk low. Tell him your name. Tell him nobody's mad. Can you do that? Yeah. A shaky breath. Yeah, I can do that. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I was there in 7. I don't remember most of that drive. I remember the traffic light at Burnside being red, and my hand on the horn before I caught myself. I remember the way Harlow Street looked when I turned onto it, the big oak tree at the corner, dropping leaves early, a kid on a bike 2 houses down. Everything ordinary and quiet, and completely wrong. I remember parking crooked against the curb and not caring. What I remember most is how my hands felt on the steering wheel. I had run into burning buildings. I had carried people out of structures that were 30 seconds from collapse. I had held a man's hand while the paramedics worked on him in the middle of a burning kitchen. My hands had never shaken doing any of that. They were shaking now. I didn't know why yet. I just knew that the thing sitting in my chest, the cold, heavy thing that had settled there the moment I heard Hector's voice go wrong, was something different from anything I'd felt in 40 years of emergencies. Those emergencies involved strangers. I got out of the car and went inside. Hector was standing at the foot of the stairs when I came through the front door, and the look on his face stopped me for half a second. This was a man I'd watched stay cheerful through a sewage backup at the fire station's south building, elbow deep in the worst of it, cracking jokes the entire time. The man at the bottom of my daughter's staircase looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 45 minutes. He's still up there, Hector said, his voice low. I did what you said. Sat on the floor, talked to him a little. He didn't answer, but he stopped trying to make himself smaller, if that makes sense. It makes sense, I said. Stay down here. I went up the stairs slowly, the way I used to climb into damaged structures, 1 foot, then the other, feeling for what was solid. The second-floor hallway was painted that particular shade of gray that Diane had called something with a French name when she redid the house. 3 doors, all open. At the far end was the door to the attic room. It had a deadbolt on it, not the original hardware. I knew every inch of that house. I'd owned it for 22 years. This was a new deadbolt, heavy-duty, the kind you'd put on an exterior door. Mounted on the outside. Locked from the outside. I stood there looking at it for a moment. A lock on the outside of a door means one thing. It means the person on the inside doesn't get to decide when they leave. Hector had popped it to get in. He'd used a tension wrench from his kit when the code panel didn't recognize his override key. The door was open a few inches. I pushed it the rest of the way. The smell came first. Something close and stale, the particular heaviness of a space that doesn't get enough fresh air. Not filthy, but lived in a way that a room should never be lived in. The attic room was finished, carpeted, drywalled, a small window on the front-facing wall that somebody had covered with black construction paper. The Tesla Powerwall inverter hummed in the back corner, mounted to the wall above a small workbench. Somebody had pushed storage boxes around it in a rough semicircle, leaving a gap behind the unit about the size of a child. In that gap was a little boy. He was sitting cross-legged on a folded moving blanket, his back against the wall, looking at me with eyes that didn't blink. 6 years old, maybe small even for that, the kind of small that takes time to get to. Thinning brown hair that had been cut with something that wasn't scissors meant for hair. A gray t-shirt 2 sizes too big. Dinosaur pajama pants. Bare feet. Next to him a flashlight. 3 crayon stubs, a coloring book, with half the pages used up, and a plastic bowl with dried mac and cheese caked around the rim. I crouched down about 6 feet back, put both hands flat on the carpet where he could see them, and kept my voice the way I'd learned to keep it in 30 years of talking to scared kids at fire scenes. "Hey, buddy. My name's Frank. I'm not going to come any closer than this, okay? I'm just going to sit right here." He didn't move. His eyes tracked me the way a small animal tracks something it hasn't decided is safe yet. "The man who was up here before his name is Hector. He didn't know you were here. Nobody's in trouble. Nobody's mad." I paused. "Are you hungry? I can get you whatever you want." He stared at me for a long time. Then his gaze slid sideways to the mini-fridge tucked under the short section of knee wall to his left, the kind of compact refrigerator you'd find in a college dorm room, humming faintly under the sound of the inverter. "It's not time for food yet," he said. His voice was smaller than I expected, careful in a way that 6-year-old voices aren't supposed to be careful. "I have to wait until the right day." I felt the floor shift under me. Not literally, but somewhere in my chest, something dropped. "Who told you to wait?" I asked. "The schedule," he said. "On the fridge." I looked. There was a piece of notebook paper taped to the mini-fridge door with masking tape. Handwriting. I recognized neat, deliberate, unmistakably my daughter's. A grid of days. Checkboxes. Each sandwich labeled with a number. My eyes dropped to the bottom of the page, where a line had been added, in smaller writing, underlined twice. "Don't come downstairs." My throat closed around whatever I'd been about to say next. "What's your name?" I managed. "Noah." "Noah." I said it once, just to hear it out loud. "How old are you, Noah?" 6. He pulled his knees up to his chest. "I'll be 7 in March." "Noah, do you know who I am?" He shook his head slowly. "Mama said nobody comes up here." My jaw tightened. I kept my face neutral the way I'd kept it neutral for 40 years of delivering bad news in smoke-filled hallways. "Your mama is her name, Diane." A small nod. "Noah." I leaned forward just slightly, staying low, keeping my hands visible. "Can I ask you something? Where's your dad?" He thought about it the way kids think about things they've been told and aren't sure they're allowed to repeat. Then he said, "I never met him. Mama said he went very far away." I sat with that for a moment. Behind me, the inverter hummed. Outside, through the gap in the construction paper on the window, a sliver of September light cut across the carpet. I was inside my daughter's house. I had been inside this house dozens of times over the past 3 years, to fix the gutters, to drop off a birthday card, to check on a rattling furnace in February. I had stood in the kitchen directly below this room and drunk coffee and talked about nothing important, while Diane stood at the counter looking at her phone. And the whole time this little boy had been up here. "Noah," I said, keeping my voice steady by sheer will, "would it be okay if I got you something to eat? Something real, not from the fridge." He looked at the fridge again, then back at me, conflict working across his face. "Mama said to only eat from the schedule." I know she did. I held out one hand, palm up, and waited. "But I'm asking you to trust me instead. Just this once. Can you do that?" He stared at my open hand for a long moment. This old man's hand, rough from 40 years of work, stretched out on the carpet of a room that should never have been anyone's home. Then slowly, Noah Carter unfolded his legs, reached out, and placed his small hand in mine. He weighed almost nothing when I lifted him. I set Noah down on the carpet as gently as I could, and crouched beside him, keeping myself at his level. He let me hold him for exactly as long as it took to carry him 3 steps away from the gap behind the inverter. And then his small body went careful again, not stiff, not fighting, just watchful. The way a kid gets watchful when they've learned that the world makes more sense when you stay still and don't ask for too much. I sat down cross-legged on the floor, my back against the wall, and gestured to the space beside me. "You don't have to sit next to me," I said. "You can sit wherever you want. I'm not going anywhere." He considered this like it was a math problem. Then he sat down about 2 feet to my left knees, pulled up hands in his lap. "Noah," I said, "when did you last eat something?" "This morning," he said. "I had half of number 4. "Half of number 4? He pointed at the mini fridge. "I have to make them last. There's 5 left. That's supposed to be enough until the red circle day." I looked at the fridge door, that handwritten schedule. I'd already seen the sandwiches numbered 1 through 8. He'd eaten through 3.5. 5 remained, each one portioned out for a specific day. Not because he wasn't hungry, because he'd done the math himself at 6 years old and decided that eating half a sandwich now meant he'd have enough to get through to the end. My chest felt like somebody had put a fist through it. "You counted them out yourself?" I asked, keeping my voice easy like we were just talking. "I always count," he said simply. "Mama says I have to be careful because sometimes she forgets the day." He said it the way you say the sky is blue. No anger in it, no resentment. Just fact. I had to look down at my hands for a second. "Noah," I said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you tell me, nobody's going to be upset with you." "Okay." He nodded, cautious. "Do you ever go downstairs to the kitchen or the living room?" His whole body tightened the way a candle flame tightens in a breeze. "I'm not supposed to." "Who told you that?" "Mama." He glanced at the door. "She says if the people downstairs hear me, I'll have to go to the bad place." "The bad place," I repeated. "What's the bad place?" His voice dropped to almost nothing. "A room with no light, and no flashlight, and no coloring book. Mama said if I'm not quiet enough, that's where I go." He paused. "I try really hard to be quiet enough. I don't always get it right." My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my temples. I made myself breathe out slow. "Easy, Frank. Easy. Noah, you haven't done anything wrong. I want you to hear that clearly. Not one single thing." He looked at me sideways, and the expression on his face nearly wrecked me. It wasn't relief. It was the look of a kid who'd heard something nice before and wasn't sure yet whether to believe it. That's when I noticed the notebook. It was small, the kind with the black and white marbled cover you find in school supply aisles, sitting beside the flashlight. A little house had been drawn on the cover in crayon Noah's artwork, the kind with a sun in the corner and smoke coming out the chimney. "Can I look at that?" I asked. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands once, then held it out. I opened it. The handwriting on the inside was small and effortful. The letters big and uneven, the way they are when a child is still learning how to make their hand do what their brain wants. And what his brain had wanted to write line by line down the first page was this: "Don't cry. Don't knock on the door. Don't call out loud. Don't make noise when people come over. Say sorry first. Say sorry even when you don't know what you did wrong." I turned the page. More rules. Don't let the floorboards creak after 9 o'clock. Eat slow so the food lasts. Don't turn the flashlight toward the window at night. If you hear Mama's voice, be very, very still. 6 years old. He had written himself a survival manual at 6 years old. I closed the notebook and handed it back, and when our fingers touched, his hand was cold. I thought about the HVAC vent in the corner. The room got climate-controlled air, yes, but no one had thought to bring this kid a warm pair of socks. "You wrote all of this yourself," I said. "Mama helped me with some of the spelling," he said. And then quickly, like he was afraid he'd said something wrong. "I'm sorry you had to come up here. I probably made a noise when the man came in, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I was trying to. Noah. I put my hand up gently. Stop apologizing. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. Do you understand me? He pressed his lips together, and I could see him working hard not to keep talking, not to keep saying sorry, because sorry was the reflex. Sorry was what kept you safe. Can I ask you one more thing? I said. Okay. Your dad, you said you never met him. Did your mama ever tell you his name? Daniel, he said. She said he went very far away before I was born almost. I nodded slowly, turning that over. Daniel. That tracked with what I knew Diane had been with a man named Daniel Carter years back, before she married Ryan. Daniel had died in a car accident. I remembered the phone call. I remembered Diane crying. I remembered thinking she seemed to pull herself together faster than I expected. Then about 3 months later, she told me that Daniel's family in California wanted to raise Noah. That they had more stability, more resources. That it was the right thing for the baby. I had kissed Noah's forehead at a Sunday dinner I barely remembered, and the next week he was supposedly on a flight to California. He had been 12 months old. He had been 6 months old. And now he was sitting on the floor of an attic room, telling me he'd never met his father, that his father had gone far away, and his voice was the steadiest thing in the room, because steadiness was the only thing nobody had ever taken from him. I stood up slowly, knees protesting, and held out my hand again. Come on, I said. Let's go downstairs and get you something real to eat. He took my hand, and this time he didn't hesitate. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee, which meant Hector had found the machine while I was upstairs. He was standing at the counter with a mug in both hands when Noah and I came around the corner. And the moment Hector saw the boy, his whole face crumpled the way a man's face crumples when he's trying very hard not to fall apart in front of a child. He turned toward the window fast and made a show of setting his mug down. Hey there, Hector said, voice rough at the edges, turning back with a smile that he was clearly assembling piece by piece. My name's Hector. I like your pajamas. Those are good dinosaurs. Noah looked down at his pants like he'd forgotten he was wearing them. The blue one is a brachiosaurus, he said seriously. No kidding, Hector said. I did not know that. Most people think it's a brontosaurus, but those aren't actually real. Hector let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Well, I learned something today. I got Noah up onto one of the kitchen stools and started opening cabinets. The shelves were full of Diane's usual almond flour coconut aminos, 4 different kinds of protein powder, glass containers with handwritten labels in her neat script. No bread. No peanut butter. I checked the bottom cabinet and found a loaf of whole wheat shoved behind a bag of quinoa, like it was something to be ashamed of. I pulled out the bread and checked the peanut butter situation. 1 jar mostly full back of the pantry. You like peanut butter? I asked Noah. I've only had it once, he said. From a cracker. I liked it. I made him a sandwich. Spread it thick, cut it corner to corner the way my wife Helen used to cut mine when I worked early shifts. I set it in front of Noah and watched him look at it for a moment, like he was double-checking that this was really happening. Then he picked it up with both hands and ate it in 4 bites. Another one, I asked. He looked at me, then at the bread, then back at me. Am I allowed? The question hit me somewhere behind my sternum. You don't need permission from me, son. Eat as much as you want. He looked at Hector, who nodded firmly. Seconded, Hector said. Noah ate 3 sandwiches. He drank 2 full glasses of milk. He didn't say much while he ate, just focused intent the way people eat when they've been running low for a while and their body finally believes there's enough. Hector caught my eye across the kitchen and tilted his head toward the hallway. His expression asked a question. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. Let the boy eat first. When Noah slowed down on the 3rd sandwich, I told him I needed to walk through the living room for a minute, and that Hector would stay with him. Noah looked at Hector, seemed to run some internal calculation, and nodded. I went into the living room. The shelves were all Diane's books. Diane's decorative objects, the framed photos from their Hawaii trip 2 years ago, and their anniversary dinner and some wine country weekend they'd taken in the fall. It was a nice room. It looked like a magazine. I wasn't sure what made me look up at the top shelf. Maybe it was just that I knew this house the way you know a house you lived in for 20 years. Every shelf, every corner, every place where someone might tuck something away, thinking it would go unnoticed. There was a shoebox up there, white with a blue lid. I stood on my toes and brought it down. Inside were 6 envelopes, all white, all sealed, all in my handwriting. I stood there staring at them, not breathing, my heart doing something irregular and painful in my chest. 6 envelopes, one for each birthday. I remembered sending them sitting at my kitchen table with a card and a check inside each one, addressing them carefully, putting them in the mail. Telling myself that even if Noah was in California, even if I never got to see him, at least he'd know his grandfather was thinking about him. Every single one had been intercepted. Opened, no, still sealed. Diane had taken them out of the mailbox before they could be forwarded or intercepted them some other way, and put them in a box on her shelf and never said a word. Noah had never known they existed. My hands were shaking when I carried the box back into the kitchen. Hector saw my face and went very still. Noah looked up from his half-finished third sandwich. I sat down on the stool beside him and set one envelope on the counter between us. My own handwriting looked strange to me just then, blocky and old-fashioned the way I'd always written. "Noah," I said, "do you know what this is?" He leaned over to look. "A letter, a birthday card. I sent one to you every year since you were born." My voice came out steadier than it had any right to. "There are 6 of them. One for every birthday you've had." Noah stared at the envelope. His forehead creased in that careful way of his. "For me," he said. "But I never got any cards." "I know," I said. "You do now." I watched him pick it up, this envelope with his name on it, written in my hand 7 years ago, and turn it over slowly. He looked at the sealed flap, then up at me. "Can I open it?" "They're yours," I said. "Every one of them." He was working his finger under the flap when it hit me, this boy sitting in his mother's kitchen, eating his third peanut butter sandwich, opening a birthday card from a grandfather he'd never been told existed, and the complete and total impossibility of the lie that had made all of this necessary. Diane had told me Noah was in California. She had said it with her eyes wet and her voice soft, and I had held her hand and told her she'd done the right thing. I had stood in this house, in this kitchen, and I had never once imagined that the child she was supposedly grieving was directly above my head. I stood up, walked to the far end of the counter, picked up my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. "This is Frank Calloway," I said. My voice was flat and completely even. "I'm at 2847 Harlow Street in Portland. I'm a retired firefighter. I have a 6-year-old child here who has been confined in an attic room, malnourished, no medical records, no schooling. I need a unit and a Child Protective Services response. This is not an accident. This is deliberate." Behind me, I could hear Noah in a small, wondering voice reading the first words of a birthday card out loud. I did not turn around. If I turned around right then, I would not be able to finish the call. I stayed on the line until they told me units were on the way. The first unit arrived at 1:23 in the afternoon. 2 officers in a black and white followed 12 minutes later by a navy blue sedan that parked crooked against the curb, like the driver had more important things on her mind than parallel parking. Detective Lisa Morgan stepped out of that sedan, and I knew immediately she was the person I needed. Mid-40s blazer, the color of a storm cloud hair, pulled back in a way that said she didn't have time to think about her hair. She moved the way experienced investigators move, unhurried, but deliberate, like every step was a decision. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and eyes that were already scanning the house behind me. "You're the one who called it in," she said. "Not a question. Frank Calloway. I own the property. My daughter and son-in-law live here. They're currently in Hawaii. The child is inside. In the kitchen with a friend of mine. His name is Noah. He's 6. Something shifted in Morgan's expression, just a fraction, just enough for me to catch it, before her face went professional again. Okay, she said. Walk me through it. I walked her through it. All of it, the alert Hector's call, the deadbolt on the outside of the attic door, Noah behind the inverter unit, the numbered sandwiches, the schedule on the fridge. I watched her write in her notebook without looking down, eyes on me the whole time, and I understood she was reading me as much as she was recording me. Dale Whitfield from Child Protective Services arrived 20 minutes after Morgan. A man in his 50s with the kind of weathered patience that only comes from doing difficult work for a long time. He shook my hand and said he'd been with CPS for 19 years. I believed him. His eyes had the same quality as mine used to back when I was pulling people out of fires, the look of someone who has already imagined the worst and is just waiting to find out if they're right. I'm going to run the child's name through the system right now, Dale said, opening his tablet. Noah Carter, correct. That's what he told me, Dale typed. He waited. He looked at the screen. Then he set the tablet down on the kitchen table and rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. Mr. Calloway, he said. Noah Carter does not exist in any Oregon state database after March of 2020. No school enrollment. No Medicaid. No primary care physician. No dental records. No updated address with the Social Security Administration. He paused. He was 2 years old in March 2020. I pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down because my legs had made a decision before my brain could argue with them. She wiped him out, I said. Not wiped, Dale said carefully. She stopped registering him with any system that would have created a paper trail. His birth certificate exists. That's federal, you can't touch that. But from the state's perspective, from every functional database, a school or a doctor or a social worker would check this child hasn't existed for 4 years. He let that land, then added, That is not an oversight, Mr. Calloway. That takes effort. Morgan came back down from the attic room, then snapping off a pair of blue latex gloves. She had Hector's phone in an evidence bag and a second bag with the schedule sheet from the fridge, the one with the numbered sandwiches and the 2 lines at the bottom. She set both bags on the table. There's a second line on the back of that note, she said, pointing to the schedule sheet through the clear plastic. Mr. Alvarez photographed the front when he first found the child. He didn't see the reverse. She turned the bag over. In Diane's neat, unhurried handwriting, Be quiet, or you'll have to go to the bad place. My stomach turned over hard. She wrote that, I said. My voice came out rough. That's my daughter's handwriting. We'll confirm it forensically, Morgan said. Not unkindly, but not softly either. Mr. Calloway, we also need Noah to tell us what the bad place is. In his own words, in a controlled setting with a child psychologist present. That conversation will carry more legal weight than anything we find in this house. He already told me, I said. A room with no light and no flashlight, no coloring book. She used it as a threat to keep him quiet when she had people over. Dale's jaw tightened. He wrote something down. Morgan turned towards the hallway. I'm going to need every room. Kitchen, living space, attic, all of it. She looked at me. You should step outside, Mr. Calloway. This is going to take a while. I went outside. The September afternoon was cool and gray the way Portland afternoons get in early fall, that particular low light that makes everything look like it's waiting for something. I walked around to the front of the house and stood on the sidewalk, and I don't know what made me do it, but I looked up. The attic window. Small, rectangular, set into the peak of the roofline. The black construction paper was still up, but Morgan's team had peeled back one corner to photograph through the glass, and there was a gap now, a sliver of dark interior visible from where I was standing on the sidewalk. I had stood on this sidewalk before. Dozens of times. I'd parked here to drop off Diane's birthday present in April. I'd stood here in February arguing with the lawn service guy about the overgrown hedge. I had looked up at this house and seen a house. I had never once thought to wonder what was looking back. My throat closed up and I had to press my lips together hard to hold whatever was trying to come out of me. 40 years of running into burning buildings and a sliver of dark window was what finally made my knees go soft. I went back inside before Morgan could see my face. The woman next door had been watching from her porch for the better part of an hour. Carol Webb was 63 years old, retired schoolteacher. The kind of neighbor who brought over zucchini from her garden, whether you asked for it or not. I'd met her twice in 3 years, once when I came to fix the gutters, once when I stopped to pick up a package Diane had missed. She'd seemed pleasant both times. She seemed shaken now. "I saw the police cars," she said when Morgan and I came to her door. "I figured someone would come talk to me eventually." She stepped back to let us in without being asked. "I have something you need to see." Her living room was the mirror opposite of Diane's warm colors family photographs, a dog-eared stack of library books on the side table. She led us to her kitchen table where a laptop was already open. "I have a security camera on my garage," she said. "Covers most of my driveway and a good angle of the front of your daughter's house. I keep 60 days of footage." She pulled out the chair next to the laptop and looked at me. "Mr. Calloway, I need you to sit down for this." Something in her voice made the hairs on my arms stand up. I sat. She opened a file dated April 14th of last year. The footage was in color decent resolution, her driveway in the foreground, and beyond the property line, the front face of 2847 Harlow Street clearly visible. In the lower left corner of the frame I could see myself. Navy work jacket, the green cap I always wore to do yard work. I was pushing the lawnmower along the front strip, headphones around my neck, stopping every few passes to pull up a weed. Carol pointed to the upper right of the screen. "There," she said. "Watch the attic window." I leaned forward. The construction paper on the attic window had a corner that didn't lie flat, curled up at the edge, leaving a gap maybe an inch wide. And in that gap, barely visible, almost nothing, was a face. Small, pale, still as water. Noah had been watching me mow the lawn. My chest seized so hard I put one hand flat on the table. "Keep watching," Carol said quietly. The footage continued. On screen, I finished a pass with the mower paused to wipe the back of my neck and lifted my hand in a wave toward Carol's house. I remembered doing that. Remembered her waving back from the porch. And in the upper corner of the frame, in the gap behind the construction paper, a small hand rose into the light and waved back. He had waved back. He had been standing in the dark behind a piece of black paper, and he had seen his grandfather wave at the neighbor, and he had waved back, and nobody had seen it. Not Carol. Not me. Nobody. My eyes burned so badly, I had to turn my face away from the screen. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and breathed through my nose until the burning subsided enough that I could speak. "How many times?" My voice came out like gravel. "How many times does he appear on that footage?" "Every single time you came over," Carol said, and her own voice was thick. "I went back through 3 months of footage this afternoon. Every time your car parked out front, he was at that window within a few minutes." She hesitated. "I didn't know, Mr. Calloway. I swear to God I did not know there was a child in that house. If I had known—" "I know," I said. "I know you didn't." Morgan was writing her pen, moving fast across the page. She'd watched the footage without a word, but when I glanced at her, I saw the set of her jaw, tight, controlled the expression of someone keeping their professional face on with both hands. We took Noah to OHSU Dornbecker Children's Hospital at 5:40 that afternoon. I rode in the back of the CPS transport vehicle with him, because Dale said he'd allow it given the circumstances, and because Noah had gripped the sleeve of my jacket when the unfamiliar car pulled up, and I wasn't willing to pry his fingers loose. He fell asleep against my shoulder before we reached the Burnside Bridge. At the hospital, the pediatric team met us at the side entrance. The attending physician was a woman named Dr. Patricia Shaw, calm, thorough, the kind of doctor who talked to Noah directly, instead of over his head, which made him relax enough to answer her questions in full sentences. The results came back in stages over the next 2 hours. Significant malnutrition, severe vitamin D deficiency from prolonged lack of sunlight. Dr. Shaw explained that the body produces vitamin D through skin exposure to natural light, and that Noah's levels were consistent with someone who had spent the better part of years indoors. 3 teeth with untreated decay. And the one that made me have to stand up and walk to the window, a partially healed greenstick fracture in his left forearm improperly set, because it had never been treated, the bone knitting itself back together at a slight angle. He broke his arm. Dr. Shaw told me carefully, and never saw a doctor. How long ago? I asked. Based on the healing pattern, I'd estimate 6 to 8 months. I stood at the window of that hospital room and looked out at the lights of Portland and thought about a little boy in an attic room with a broken arm rationing sandwiches, writing rules for himself in a marble notebook, watching his grandfather mow the lawn through a gap in the construction paper. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Unknown number, area code 808, Hawaii. I stared at it through 4 full rings. Then I pressed the side button and sent the call to voicemail. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, but I knew it was coming. Before I show you what Detective Morgan pulled from those bank statements, I need to know you're still with me. Drop the number 7 in the comments right now. Just a 7, that's all. Because what I'm about to read out loud is the kind of thing that changes how you see people forever. And a gentle reminder, this story contains some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. It may not reflect every detail exactly as it happened. If that's not the kind of content you're here for, this is a perfectly fine place to step away. I bought a coffee from the cart outside the central precinct and carried it inside with both hands, the way you carry something hot when your hands need something to hold. It was 8 o'clock Tuesday morning, and I'd slept maybe 3 hours, not from insomnia, but from the particular exhaustion that sits behind your eyes and won't let you stop replaying things. Morgan was already at her desk when I got there, a stack of printed documents on one side and a second cup of coffee on the other. She stood when she saw me, gestured to the chair across from her. "How's the boy?" she asked. "Stable," I said. "The hospital kept him overnight. He ate a full breakfast this morning, according to the nurse who called me at 7. I set my coffee down. That's the best news I've had in 24 hours. Good. Morgan sat and pulled the top document off the stack. Let's talk about the money. She walked me through it, the way a good detective walks you through something, not dumping it all at once, but building it layer by layer so the picture assembles itself in your head, and you understand every piece before she adds the next one. Noah's father, Daniel Carter, had died in a car accident in December of 2018, when Noah was 9 months old. As Noah's surviving parent, Diane, had applied for and been approved for Social Security survivor benefits, a federal program that pays monthly support to the minor children of deceased workers. The amount varied based on Daniel's earnings record, but in this case it came to approximately $1,100 per month, deposited into a custodian account in Noah's name, with Diane listed as the representative payee. What does representative payee mean legally? I asked. It means she was authorized to receive and manage the funds on Noah's behalf, Morgan said. The law requires that money to be spent on the child's food, clothing, housing, medical care, education, not on anything else. She slid the first document across the desk. It is a federal crime to misuse those funds. Under 42 U.S. Code Section 408, the penalty is up to 5 years in federal prison per violation. Given that she's been doing this for approximately 5 years, we're looking at potential charges that stack considerably. I looked at the document. $1,100 a month. 60 months. $66,000, give or take. There's more, Morgan said. Daniel Carter's parents. Noah's paternal grandparents had established a private trust fund for Noah before they both passed away within a year of Daniel's death. The fund paid out approximately $800 per month, also into a custodian account with Diane as the managing party. That's a separate track, Morgan said. Social Security fraud is federal. Misappropriation of a private trust is a state charge embezzlement of a minor's assets. Two different prosecutors, two different courts running simultaneously. How much total? I asked, even though some part of me already didn't want to know. Morgan pulled out a second document, a summary sheet, numbers organized in clean columns. Between the survivor benefits, the trust fund, and a $45,000 life insurance payout from Daniel's policy that Diane received as Noah's guardian, total misappropriated assets over 5 years come to approximately $159,000. I set down my coffee cup because I didn't trust my hands with it anymore. Show me where it went, I said. Morgan laid out the third document, a timeline of withdrawals cross-referenced with purchases. March 2022, the same month, Diane and Ryan moved into Harlow Street. A new lease initiated on a Mercedes GLE, monthly payments of $1,847. June 2022, a 10-day Hawaii trip, airfare and resort totaling $8,400. September 2022, a bill from a place called Cascade Aesthetic and Wellness, $3,200 for procedures I didn't want to know the names of. On and on, month after month, the money cycling through like water through a drain. Here, Morgan said, pointing to a flagged entry about 3/4 down the page. August of this year. 3 weeks before the Hawaii trip you just facilitated. Her finger rested on a notation in red Noah cut to 1 meal. Overspent this month. My chest went tight and hot at the same time. She wrote that down, I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected. She actually wrote it down. It was in her notes app, Morgan said. We obtained her iCloud backup yesterday afternoon under an emergency search warrant in Oregon. Child endangerment cases qualify for expedited warrant processing, which means a judge can authorize it within hours rather than days. The note is time-stamped August 19th. She pointed to the next line on the summary. Same month, August 23rd, a Louis Vuitton purchase for $2,800. The room felt smaller than it had a minute ago. I put both palms flat on the table and breathed. She cut his food to 1 meal a day, I said slowly, so she could buy a purse. That is what the documents show, Morgan said. She said it evenly without editorializing, and I appreciated that. I didn't need her to be angry for me. I had enough of my own. I sat with that for the moment, the numbers laid out in front of me in black and red. $159,000. 1 meal a day. A Louis Vuitton bag. A numbered sandwich in a mini fridge. You said yesterday there was something else, I said. An audio file. Morgan nodded slowly. She reached for her tablet and set it on the table between us, screen facing me. It was recovered from Ryan Mercer's phone backup, she said. He recorded it himself without Diane's knowledge during an argument in March of this year. Under Oregon law, that recording is legal. The state follows what's called one-party consent, meaning any person who is part of a conversation can legally record it without telling the other party. She looked at me steadily. The file is 14 minutes long. I want you to hear it. But I also want you to prepare yourself, Mr. Calloway, because what's on it is not easy listening. I looked at the tablet. The file icon sat there on the screen, small and ordinary, the way a grenade looks ordinary until someone pulls the pin. Give me a minute, I said. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the gray Portland morning. The traffic on 4th Avenue, a food cart opening up across the street, a woman jogging with a stroller, the whole ordinary city going about its ordinary business. I thought about Noah at the hospital eating breakfast. I thought about him carefully dividing the last 5 sandwiches in a mini fridge. I turned around and sat back down. Play it, I said. Morgan pressed play and the room changed. The audio started with background noise, the particular acoustic of a kitchen at night, the low hum of a refrigerator, the tick of a cooling oven. Then Ryan's voice, low and tight, like a man who had been working up to this conversation for a long time and finally couldn't hold it back anymore. We can't keep Noah up there forever, Diane. He's 6 years old. He needs school. He needs a doctor. His arm is fine. Diane's voice. I had heard that voice my entire life, and I still flinched at how flat it was. Not angry. Not defensive. Just flat the way a door sounds when it closes on something it doesn't want to deal with. His arm healed wrong, Ryan said. He's been favoring it for months. If someone at a hospital sees that X-ray, they're going to ask questions. Nobody is going to see any X-ray because he is not going to a hospital. Diane, listen to yourself. Listen to what you're actually saying. I'm saying what I've been saying for 3 years. He is fine. He has food. He has a room. He has a flashlight and a coloring book and 4 walls. Ryan's voice broke on the last word, just slightly. That's not a room. That's enough. Her voice sharpened for the first time. You want to send him to a group home? You want to hand him over to the state? Do you have any idea what happens to kids in those places? At least he'd be out of my hair, be somebody else's problem. A short pause. Every month, Ryan. Almost $2,000 every single month. You want to give that up for what? For a clear conscience. My hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles had gone white. I made myself loosen them 1 finger at a time. Ryan's voice dropped to something barely above a murmur. He called me Daddy last week. A long pause. The refrigerator hummed. Then Diane's voice, cold and precise as a scalpel. Don't let him do that again. Diane, I mean it. Don't let him. He is not your son. He is not your responsibility. He is not. A brief stop, as if she was choosing the next word carefully. He is not a child, Ryan. He is a monthly deposit. He is a line item. If my father ever finds out Noah is still in this house, he will take him. He will take the money, he will take the house, and he will take everything we have built. So you are going to go back upstairs tomorrow, and you are going to remind Noah of the rules, and you are going to stop pretending this situation is something it is not. Another pause. Ryan's voice was so small, I had to lean forward to catch it. What is it then? If it's not a child up there, what is it? Diane answered without a single moment of hesitation. He is my money. Morgan reached over and stopped the playback. I pushed back from the table and stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. I walked to the window, the same window I'd looked out of 10 minutes ago, same gray morning, same food cart, same jogger, and I put one hand flat against the glass and just breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way they taught me in the fire academy when a scene was too much and you needed to stay functional. He is my money. She had said it. My daughter had stood in the kitchen of the house I gave her in the house where I raised her, and she had looked her husband in the eye and said those 4 words about a 6-year-old boy with a broken arm and a notebook full of rules for staying invisible, and her voice had not wavered once. Mr. Calloway. Morgan's voice came from behind me, steady and even. I know that was hard to hear. Take whatever time you need. I turned around. My eyes were burning, and I didn't try to hide it. The recording, I said. Ryan made it himself. That means it's admissible. In Oregon, yes. One-party consent. He was a participant in the conversation. He had every legal right to record it. And because he recorded it on a personal device that's now in police custody under a valid warrant, it becomes evidence. She paused. The phrase, "he is my money," is going to be the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. 12 jurors are going to hear Diane Calloway say those words in her own voice, and there is no lawyer in Oregon who can explain that away. I nodded slowly, pulling myself back together, the way you pull yourself back together when you're still on the clock and there's still work to do. What happens now? I asked. We wait for Diane and Ryan to land. We've been in contact with their airline. Their return flight touches down at PDX tomorrow morning. Morgan closed her tablet. When they arrive, we'll be there. She paused. The DA's office has already flagged this for expedited processing under Oregon's child endangerment statutes. Given the volume of documented evidence, they're pushing for a fast-track calendar. It won't be quick, but it will be faster than most. My phone buzzed against the table. I looked down at the screen. Unknown number, but the callback was a local Portland area code, and when I let it go to voicemail and listened 30 seconds later, the voice was clipped and professional. This is Sarah Ellison calling on behalf of Diane Calloway Mercer. My client is aware of the current situation and would like to resolve this matter privately within the family before any further legal proceedings. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. I deleted the message, picked up my coffee, and looked at Morgan. Her lawyer just called me, I said. Wants to handle this within the family. Morgan raised one eyebrow. What did you tell her? I haven't called back yet. I set the coffee down. But I will. And when I do, I'm going to tell her that the only family that matters in this situation is currently in a hospital bed eating his first real breakfast in God knows how long. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. There's nothing to resolve privately. This is done in a courtroom. Morgan almost smiled. Almost. Margaret Orozco's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Southwest Broadway, and the view from her window was the kind of view that reminded you Portland was a real city with real consequences. I called her from the precinct parking lot at 2:15 Tuesday afternoon, and by the time I finished explaining the situation, she had already pulled up the relevant statutes on her second monitor. Come in tomorrow morning, she said. 8:30. Bring everything Morgan has given you, every document, every photo. We are going to build this correctly from the ground up. She paused. Mr. Calloway, I've been doing family law for 22 years. Don't lose sleep tonight. Just bring me the paperwork. I appreciated that she didn't make promises. People who make promises before they've seen the evidence don't know what they're talking about. Before I got back in my car, Morgan called. I've got someone you need to hear about, she said. His name is Marcus Webb. He's an Amazon delivery driver who covers the Harlow Street route. He called our tip line this morning after seeing the neighborhood alert we put out. What did he see? More like what did he hear? He says for the past year and a half, whenever he delivered to 2847, he heard a sound from inside the house. Not a TV, not music. He described it as a rhythmic knocking from the ceiling, steady repeated like someone tapping with their knuckles on a regular beat. Morgan's voice stayed level, but something underneath it had gone tight. Every time he mentioned it to your daughter, she told him it was the upstairs television. My mouth went dry. He believed her. He didn't have a reason not to. But he kept noticing it. Said it bothered him in a way he couldn't quite name. A short pause. His delivery camera, the one mounted on his vest, recorded footage from a drop-off on June 22nd of this year. Diane opened the front door to sign for a package, turned her back to grab a pen, and the camera caught the attic window in the background. There's a face in the gap. I closed my eyes for a second. June 22nd. 3 months ago. Noah standing at that window while I was somewhere on the other side of town, thinking he was in California. I need to ask Noah about the knocking, I said. I already did, Morgan said. I had one of our child specialists ask him this afternoon very gently. He said, She stopped for a half second, and for the first time since I'd met her, I heard something crack in her professional composure. He said, and I'm quoting directly, I knocked to know I was still here. I sat down on the hood of my car. My legs just gave out, and I sat down on the hood of my car in a parking lot on 4th Avenue and stared at the pavement. A 6-year-old boy in an attic room had knocked on the floorboards, not to call for help, not to make noise, not to break any of the rules his mother had written for him, just to feel the vibration come back through his own knuckles and confirm that he was real, that he existed, that the world was still solid around him. "Mr. Calloway," Morgan's voice came through the phone. "I'm here," I said. My voice was barely functional. "I'm here. What time tomorrow? Webb is coming in at 10 to give a formal statement. I'll have everything ready for when you bring your attorney." I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and didn't sleep. Margaret Orozco's conference room the next morning felt like a war room, which I supposed it was. She was already there when I arrived at 8:25, blazer-pressed reading glasses on a yellow legal pad covered in notes she'd apparently made before I walked in the door. The documents Morgan had given me were spread across the table within 10 minutes of my arrival, and Margaret moved through them the way a surgeon moves through an operation, quick, precise, without a single wasted motion. Social Security fraud, federal charges up to 5 years per count, and we have 60 months of misuse documented. She said, not looking up from the financial records, embezzlement of the private trust state charges separate prosecution. The insurance payout misappropriation third track. She flipped to the medical report. Malnutrition, vitamin D deficiency, untreated fracture, dental decay. That's your child endangerment and criminal neglect right there. She set the medical report down and picked up the checklist photo. And this. She read the back of the checklist out loud, the bad place line, and set it down with the particular care of someone handling something that disgusts them. False imprisonment. That's a felony in Oregon up to 5 years. "How does the kinship placement work?" I asked. "You're the maternal grandfather, you own the property where the child was confined, and you are the person who reported the crime. You are the definition of a qualified kinship caregiver under Oregon law." She picked up her pen. "I'm filing emergency placement paperwork today. Given the circumstances, active criminal investigation child with no other identified family, I expect approval within 4 hours." She looked at me over her glasses. "After that, we file for permanent guardianship, and when that's established, we file for adoption. And Diane's parental rights." Margaret's expression didn't change, but something in it sharpened. "With the evidence currently on this table, Mr. Calloway, the recording, the financial records, the medical findings, the confinement documentation, termination of parental rights, is not a question of if. It is a question of how quickly we can get in front of the right judge." She set her pen down and looked at me directly. "In 22 years of family law, I have rarely seen a case build itself this neatly. Every single piece of evidence tells the same story. We are going to bury them." She said it without satisfaction and without cruelty. Just fact. I signed the kinship placement paperwork at 9:40 that morning. Approval came through at 1:52 in the afternoon, while I was eating a sandwich I didn't taste at a diner, 2 blocks from Margaret's office. I drove to the hospital. In the elevator on the way up to the pediatric floor, my phone buzzed with a text from Morgan Placement approved. "Confirmed with hospital. You can take him home when medical team clears him." I read it 3 times. When I walked into Noah's room, he was sitting up in bed with the coloring book I'd brought him yesterday, working on a page with the focused intensity of a kid who had decided that this particular dinosaur was going to be exactly the right shade of green. He looked up when I came in, and the small, careful smile he gave me did something permanent to the inside of my chest. I pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better," he said. "The doctor said my arm is going to need a real fix. She said it'll hurt, but then it'll be straight." He considered this. "I think I want it to be straight." "We'll make sure it gets straight," I said. He went back to his coloring for a moment. Then, without looking up, in the same tone he might use to ask about the weather, "Pop, are you my home now?" The word hit me somewhere I wasn't prepared for. Not grandfather. Not the man who found me. Pop. I leaned forward and put both elbows on my knees so I was at his level. "I am whatever you need me to be," I said, "for as long as you need me to be it." He looked up from the dinosaur and studied my face with those careful eyes of his. Then he nodded once the way a kid nods when they've already decided something and just needed the other person to confirm it. He went back to coloring. Green, exactly the right shade. I was back at the hospital the next afternoon when Morgan called. Noah was sitting cross-legged on his bed, with a fresh box of crayons I'd picked up from the gift shop downstairs, 64 colors, the big yellow box, working his way through a drawing that involved what appeared to be a very large dog, a house with a proper front door, and a figure wearing a green hat that I chose to interpret as a compliment. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. I held up one finger to Noah. He gave me a solemn nod, deeply unbothered, and stepped to the far corner of the room. "We pulled something off Diane's iCloud this morning," Morgan said. "A photograph. It was in a hidden album, the kind you tuck things into when you don't want them showing up in your regular camera roll." A pause. "It's Noah. He looks about 3 years old. He's sitting in the kitchen at Harlow Street in front of a birthday cake, 3 candles. The timestamp on the file is March 14th, 2021, 2:34 in the afternoon. Something cold started moving through my blood. "March 14th, I said. "Yes, sir. 2021. "That's correct." I turned toward the window. My hand tightened around the phone until my fingers ached. "I was at that house on March 14th, 2021, I said. "I drove over to fix a dripping faucet under the kitchen sink. I have it in my calendar." I'd checked my phone the moment the date registered, old habit from the fire department logging every call-out. I arrived at 2:15 that afternoon. I was in that kitchen for almost an hour. "I know," Morgan said quietly. "I checked your statement." Diane met me at the front door. She said she told me she'd sent Noah to California that morning. Early flight. She said the Carter family had arranged it. My voice was getting rougher with every sentence, and I couldn't stop it. I was in the kitchen. I was directly below that attic room for an hour. And the whole time Noah was upstairs eating birthday cake, Morgan said. She didn't say it to hurt me. She said it because it was true, and we both needed to say it out loud. I pressed my free hand flat against the cold hospital window glass and breathed. "There was a noise," I said. "At some point while I was working under the sink, I heard something from above, a small thud, like something being set down. I asked Diane about it. She said mice. She said Ryan was going to call an exterminator." A sound came out of me that wasn't quite a laugh. I finished the faucet, had a cup of coffee, and drove home. I sat in my kitchen that evening feeling sad about a grandson I thought was 2,000 miles away. He was 15 feet above my head. My throat closed completely on the last sentence. "Mr. Calloway." Morgan's voice was careful. "This is not on you. What Diane did was deliberate, calculated, and sustained over years. She knew exactly what she was doing every single time." "I know that," I said, and I meant it, and it still felt like swallowing glass. I stood at that window for another minute, breathing until my chest stopped feeling like it was caving in. Behind me, I heard Noah set down a crayon, pick up another one, and resume drawing with the calm industry of a kid who had learned very early that the world kept going, whether you were upset about it or not. I walked back to the chair beside his bed and sat down. He didn't look up from his drawing, but he said, "Your voice sounds funny." "I just got some hard news," I said. "Is it about the bad stuff?" He said it the way kids say things they've overheard adults discussing, careful not wanting to make it worse. "Some of it, yeah." He picked up the green crayon again and added a blade of grass to the front yard of his drawing. "The doctor says hard news gets easier if you talk about it," he said. "She told me that yesterday. I don't know if it's true yet, but she seems pretty smart." Something unlocked in my chest, not all the way, but enough. "She is pretty smart," I said. "And so are you." He smiled at that small and sideways and went back to his grass. I put my hand on the bed rail, and after a moment, Noah reached over without looking up and rested his fingers on top of mine. Not gripping, not clinging, just resting. The easy touch of a kid who was slowly learning that contact didn't have to mean something was about to go wrong. My phone buzzed again. A text from Morgan Diane Calloway and Ryan Mercer, taken into custody at 2847 Harlow Street, 3:47 p.m. Both processed at Central Precinct. Diane requesting to speak with you. I read it twice. Then I typed back, not yet. I put the phone in my pocket, left my hand on the bed rail, and let Noah finish his drawing. The house had a front door, a real one painted red wide open. He'd drawn it open on purpose. I was sure of it. Morgan poured 2 cups of coffee before she sat down, which told me this was going to be one of those conversations that needed something warm to hold on to. It was Thursday morning, 2 days after Diane and Ryan had been taken into custody, and the Central Precinct felt different to me now, less like a building I was visiting, and more like somewhere I'd been coming to for years. I knew which chair squeaked. I knew the vending machine on the second floor was always out of the good chips. Grief and crisis have a way of making unfamiliar places familiar very fast. Ryan Mercer began cooperating yesterday morning, Morgan said, sliding 1 cup across the desk to me. His attorney advised him that full cooperation was his best and possibly only path to a reduced sentence. He agreed. She opened her notebook. I want to walk you through what he told us because some of it is going to be hard to hear, and I'd rather you hear it from me than read it in a report. Go ahead, I said. Ryan knew Noah was in the house from the day they moved in, March of 2022. He said Diane told him the night before they got the keys, sat him down at the kitchen table, and laid it out the way you'd present a business plan. Morgan's voice stayed even, but her pen pressed harder against the page. She said, "My father thinks Noah is in California. It stays that way. The money comes in every month whether we say anything or not, so we're not going to say anything." Ryan said Noah had been kept in a rented room across town since he was old enough to walk a place Diane paid for in cash, no lease in either of their names. Moving to Harlow Street was simply the first time she had a house big enough to keep him out of sight, without paying separately. I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. The ceramic was almost too hot, but I needed something to hold. He went along with it, I said. He pushed back, Morgan said. To be fair to the record, he pushed back multiple times in that first year. He wanted Noah enrolled in school. He wanted him seen by a doctor. He brought it up at least 4 separate times according to his statement, and Diane shut it down every time with the same argument: the money stops if anyone finds out, and without the money, they lose the lease on the Mercedes, they lose the Hawaii trips, they lose the life they'd built. She paused. Ryan told us he wasn't proud of what he chose, but he chose it. He chose it, I agreed. The words tasted like ash. In September of 2022, about 6 months after they moved in, Ryan made one purchase on his personal credit card. Not the joint account. His own card. Morgan reached into the folder in front of her and produced a single printed page. A bank statement with one line highlighted in yellow. Date September 8, 2022. Merchant Amazon. Amount $12.99. I looked at the line. Looked at Morgan. That's the flashlight, I said. That's the flashlight, she confirmed. The one Hector found next to Noah when he discovered him. Ryan bought it and left it in the attic room one afternoon when Diane was out. He said, she checked her notes. He said, and I'm quoting, "It was the only thing I could think to do that she wouldn't notice. I couldn't do the right thing, but I could do that much." The coffee cup in my hands suddenly felt very heavy. $12.99. One small flashlight purchased in secret, left in a locked room for a little boy who had been taught not to ask for anything. That was the full measure of Ryan Mercer's courage over 3 years. I set the cup down carefully. He also surrendered his email account credentials and confirmed the authenticity of the audio recording. Morgan continued. He's the one who made it recorded the fight in March on his phone, kept it, never deleted it. His attorney is calling it evidence of his intent to eventually come forward. She tilted her head slightly. Whether that's true or whether he just kept it for self-protection is something only Ryan knows. What's his deal, I asked. 18 months Oregon State facility. 3 years probation after release. Permanent no-contact order with Noah. She looked at me. He accepted it this morning. No negotiation, no counteroffer. Just signed. And Diane, Morgan's expression didn't move. Diane rejected every plea offer her attorney presented. She's going to trial. Her defense strategy, as near as we can tell, is that Noah had freedom of movement in the home and chose to stay in the attic room because he felt comfortable there. She said it flatly, the way you say something that barely deserves the words it takes to describe it. A sound came out of me, short, involuntary, somewhere between a laugh and something worse. She's going to tell a jury that a 6-year-old chose to live behind a deadbolt. Her attorney is going to make that argument, yes. Morgan closed her notebook. And then the jury is going to hear the audio recording and see the medical report and look at 60 months of bank statements. She picked up her pen again. There is one more thing from Ryan's statement, something he said at the very end of the session after his lawyer had already stepped out. I want to save it for tomorrow if that's all right with you. He asked me specifically not to relay it in writing. I looked at her. Why not in writing? Because, she said carefully, it's the kind of thing that changes how you understand everything that came before it. And I think you need a night before you hear it. I nodded slowly. I didn't press her. Some things earn the patience they ask for. I drove home in the early afternoon, and somewhere around the Hawthorne Bridge I realized I didn't actually want to go back to my apartment. I wanted to do something useful, something that moved forward instead of backward. I pulled into the Target on Southeast Powell and went inside. Morgan poured the coffee again Friday morning, and this time she didn't open her notebook right away. She set her cup down, folded her hands on the desk, and looked at me with the careful expression of a person who has thought about how to say something for longer than one night. After his attorney left the room yesterday, she said Ryan sat there for about 2 minutes without saying anything. Then he looked at me and said he needed to tell me something that wasn't in his formal statement, something he'd been carrying since November of last year. I put my cup down and gave her my full attention. He said he was bringing Noah's dinner up one evening sometime in mid-November. He thinks around the 12th or 13th. He unlocked the door, came in, sealed the food down on the floor next to the mini-fridge the way he always did. Morgan's voice was steady, but something underneath it was working hard to stay that way. And Noah looked up at him and said, "Thank you, Daddy." The air went out of the room. He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, Morgan continued. Quiet, simple, the way a kid says something they've been thinking about for a while and finally just say it. Ryan told me he froze. He said his whole body went cold. He wanted to answer, he said he genuinely wanted to answer, but he couldn't make himself do it because he knew what Diane would say if she found out. She paused. He put the food down, walked back out, locked the door, and went downstairs. He said Diane was standing at the bottom of the staircase. She'd heard. My hands were gripping the arms of the chair so hard the plastic creaked. That night, Morgan said, was the night he recorded the argument. Every piece of it landed at once. The recording. Diane's voice, "Don't let him do that again." Ryan not answering. A little boy in a locked room who had given the only man who ever brought him dinner, the only name he had for that kind of person, and that man had walked away without a word. My eyes burned hard and fast, and I didn't fight it this time. I let it happen, pressing my fist against my mouth, breathing through it, until it passed enough that I could speak. "He told you this because he wanted it on record," I managed. "He told me," Morgan said quietly, "because he said someone needed to know that Noah tried. That it wasn't just survival up there. That kid was trying to connect with the only people in his world, and he did it the only way a 6-year-old knows how." She looked at me directly. He wanted that to be known. I nodded. I couldn't do much more than that for a moment. "Do you want to speak with Ryan?" Morgan asked. I thought about it, genuinely. Thought about it, weighed it, turned it over. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. "He made his choices. The court will make theirs. I don't have anything to say to him that matters more than what's already in that recording." I left the precinct at 10 that morning and drove to Target. I'd gone the night before, but left with only half of what I'd planned to buy, because I'd stood in the toy aisle for 10 minutes and realized I genuinely had no idea what a 6-year-old boy who had spent 3 years in an attic room would want from the world now that the world was available to him. A woman about my daughter's age had noticed me standing there looking lost and asked if I needed help. I'd told her my grandson was 6 and I didn't know what he liked yet, and she'd looked at me for a moment, like she was deciding whether to ask a follow-up question, then just started pointing at shelves. Today I knew better what I was after. I found the art supply section and stood in front of the wall of colored pencils and markers and crayons until I found the one I wanted, the big yellow box, 64 crayons, the kind with the built-in sharpener in the back, and every shade you could imagine, and several you'd never thought to imagine. I put it in the cart without hesitating. A planet print comforter for the bed in my second room, a mushroom-shaped nightlight for the bedside table, a second smaller nightlight for the hallway, because a kid who spent 3 years rationing flashlight batteries deserved to walk to the bathroom in the dark and find the path already lit. I stood in the flashlight aisle for almost a full minute. The small ones, the practical ones, the kind that fit in a jacket pocket. I picked one up, turned it over in my hands. Then I set it back on the shelf and walked away. Noah wasn't going to need a flashlight anymore. Not like that. Not ever like that again. I brought the bags to the hospital that evening. Noah was awake, sitting up watching something on the room television, with the focused concentration of a kid experiencing cable TV at full volume for what might have been the first time. He muted it when I came in without being asked, just muted it the way a kid does when they've been taught that their sounds are less important than the adults around them. My chest tightened at that, but I let it go. We'd work on that later. I set the bags on the foot of the bed. He looked at them, looked at me, looked back at the bags. "Those are for you," I said. "All of it." He reached into the nearest bag and pulled out the yellow box of crayons. He held it with both hands, turning it slowly, reading the number on the front, 64, and then looking up at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Not the careful watchfulness, not the practiced stillness. Something wide open and a little stunned, like a window that had just been unlatched for the first time in years. 64, he said. "Every color they make," I said. He looked back down at the box, and his bottom lip trembled just once before he pulled it back under control. But his eyes were bright and wet, and when he pressed the box against his chest and held it there, it was with both arms wrapped all the way around it, like something he was afraid might disappear if he loosened his grip. "Do I get to keep all of it?" he asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Even when we go home?" Every single word of that question hit me somewhere deep and permanent. "Every single bit of it," I said, "and there's more where that came from." He buried his face in the top of the yellow box, and his small shoulders shook once, twice, and then he laughed. A real laugh, sudden and surprised, like it caught him off guard. That laugh was the best thing I'd heard in 70 years of living. 2 months is a long time and no time at all. I know that sounds like something you'd read on a greeting card, but I mean it practically. In 2 months, I learned that Noah Carter did not like scrambled eggs under any circumstances, but would eat them if they were folded into a pancake, and you didn't call them eggs. I learned that he organized his 64 crayons by color family every night before bed, always in the same order, because 3 years of rationing had taught him to take careful inventory of the things he valued. I learned that he woke up at 6:15 every morning without an alarm and lay still for several minutes, before getting up as if he was confirming that the room around him was still real. 6 weeks of that. 6 weeks of pancakes and crayons and the mushroom nightlight glowing in the dark while I sat in my armchair and listened to my apartment make the sounds an apartment makes when a child is sleeping in it for the first time. Then November came, and I put on a tie for the first time in 4 years, and I walked into Multnomah County Courthouse. The courtroom was smaller than I expected and quieter than I was prepared for. Margaret met me at the door to the gallery and walked me to a seat 3 rows back from the railing, close enough to see everything far enough that I wouldn't be in the sight line of the jury box. She had a leather folder under her arm and the expression of a woman who had done this enough times to stop being nervous about it. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Ask me in about an hour," I said. The first person I saw when I looked toward the defense table was Diane. She was wearing a charcoal gray blazer over a white blouse, hair pulled back the way she wore it to work events, posture straight. She looked like a woman who had come in for a performance review, not a criminal trial. I had not seen my daughter since the day I handed her the key to Harlow Street 3 years ago, and I sat there looking at the back of her head trying to find something I recognized. She didn't turn around. Not once, not for a second. The prosecution opened with the evidence I already knew by heart, the photographs of the attic room, the deadbolt mounted on the outside of the door, the mini-fridge with its numbered sandwiches, the construction paper on the window. The assistant district attorney presenting the case was a compact, precise woman named Rachel Foley, who laid everything out the way you build a wall, one solid brick at a time. Nothing flashy, nothing that wobbled. When she got to the financial records, she put them up on the courtroom screen and walked the jury through them line by line. The Mercedes payments, the Hawaii trips, Cascade aesthetic and wellness. The note on Diane's phone cut Noah to 1 meal overspent this month, followed by the Louis Vuitton charge 4 days later. I watched 3 of the jurors in the front row write something down at that. One of them, a man in his 50s with a gray beard, pressed his lips together so hard they went white. Then Foley played the recording. The courtroom did not change when Ryan's voice came through the speakers. It was already quiet. But it became a different kind of quiet, the kind where you become aware of your own breathing, because everyone around you has stopped making any unnecessary sound. I watched the gray-bearded juror close his eyes when Diane's voice said, "He is my money." Watched him keep them closed for a full 3 seconds. Watched him open them again and look at his notepad like he needed something ordinary to focus on. Diane did not move, did not flinch, did not tighten, did not shift in her seat. She sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her and listened to her own voice describe her son as a line item, and her face showed nothing at all. Not defiance, not shame, not the smallest crack of anything human. Just that same performance review composure held perfectly still. That was the moment I stopped being able to find the daughter I raised in the woman at that table. It wasn't anger that I felt. It was something colder and more permanent. The understanding that whoever Diane had become, she had not become it recently. She had been becoming it for a long time quietly, while I was busy believing what she told me. After a recess, Diane's defense attorney, a tall man named Gerald Shapiro, who had clearly spent a great deal of money on his suits, rose and presented the defense's position. He spoke for 22 minutes. His core argument, delivered with practiced sincerity, was that Noah had not been confined, that the attic room was his bedroom, that he was a child with anxiety who preferred small enclosed spaces and had been given a safe, comfortable environment tailored to his needs. Shapiro said the word comfortable 3 times. I counted. At the defense table, Diane nodded slightly, while her attorney spoke the way you nod at a presentation that is going exactly as planned. Judge Antoinette Reeves had been on the bench in Multnomah County for 11 years, and before that she had spent 2 decades as a child welfare attorney. The kind of background that means she had heard every argument anyone has ever made about why a child's suffering was actually something else. She was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had a way of looking at whoever was speaking in her courtroom that made you feel like she was reading the transcript of your thoughts, not just your words. She let Shapiro finish without interruption. When he sat down, she wrote something on the notepad in front of her. Then she looked up and said to no one in particular, but clearly to everyone, "The court will note that we have heard considerable discussion today about the comfort of the attic space. Tomorrow, we will hear from Dr. Sarah Coleman, a licensed child psychologist, who conducted 6 evaluation sessions with the minor child. The court is looking forward to that testimony." She closed her notepad. "We're adjourned until 9 a.m. In the hallway afterward, Margaret fell into step beside me without a word until we were through the main doors and out onto the courthouse steps. She said, "The court is looking forward," I said. "I caught that too," Margaret said. "Judges don't editorialize unless they want you to know something." She adjusted her folder under her arm. "Tomorrow is going to be the hardest day of this trial to sit through, Frank. Not because it goes badly, it won't, but because Dr. Coleman asked Noah to draw his family, and what he drew is going to be on a screen in that courtroom for everyone to see." She paused. "Prepare yourself tonight." I drove home, made grilled cheese for 2, watched Noah arrange his crayons by color family, and did not sleep well. Dr. Sarah Coleman walked into the courtroom carrying a manila folder and a box of 24 crayons, and the sight of that crayon box in an evidence bag on the witness stand made my throat tighten in a way I hadn't expected. She was 47, compact and unhurried, with the manner of someone who spent most of her professional life in rooms with frightened children and had learned to move through the world accordingly, slow, deliberate, nothing sudden. Margaret had briefed me on her credentials the evening before: licensed child psychologist, 15 years specializing in pediatric trauma court, certified expert witness in 46 prior cases. Rachel Foley began the direct examination. "Dr. Coleman, can you describe the nature of your evaluation of the minor child?" "Noah Carter, I conducted 6 sessions with Noah over a period of 8 weeks, Coleman said. Each session was approximately 45 minutes, held in a child-friendly evaluation room at the Duernbecker Family Assessment Center. My goal was to assess his psychological development, his understanding of his living circumstances, and the impact of those circumstances on his emotional and social functioning." "And what were your findings in general terms?" Coleman folded her hands in her lap. "Noah presents with what we clinically call learned helplessness, a psychological condition that develops when a person, particularly a child, is repeatedly exposed to situations in which their actions have no effect on their outcomes. In plain terms, Noah had learned to believe that what he did, said, or felt did not change what happened to him. He had adapted to that belief by minimizing himself, his noise, his needs, his presence as a survival strategy. I sat very still in the 3rd row and kept my hands flat on my knees. "Dr. Coleman," Foley continued, "you also conducted a standard projective drawing exercise with Noah. Can you explain what that is and what it involves?" A projective drawing is a tool we use with children who may have difficulty expressing complex emotional realities verbally. We ask them to draw something, in this case their family, and we observe both what they include and what they exclude, as well as how they represent the relationships and spaces in the image. "And what did Noah draw?" Coleman opened her manila folder and nodded to the court clerk. The image appeared on the projection screen mounted on the wall to the left of the witness stand, and I heard someone in the gallery draw a sharp breath. It might have been me. Noah had drawn 3 things: a tall figure wearing a green hat, a small figure standing close beside it, and a house. The house had a front door painted in heavy red crayon. It had a front yard with grass. And at the very top of the house, in the peak of the roofline, was a small rectangular window. He had drawn a window in the attic. He had put it in his picture of home. "Can you describe what Noah told you about this drawing?" Foley asked. Coleman looked at this image on the screen with the calm professionalism of someone who had prepared herself for this moment. Noah identified the tall figure as his grandfather Frank. He identified the small figure as himself. When I asked him what the house represented, he said, and I'm quoting directly from my session notes, "That's my home, me and Pop." Coleman paused. I then asked him about the window at the top of the house. He said that was his room, that it was where he used to live. A sound moved through the gallery, not loud, just a ripple of something involuntary. "Dr. Coleman," Foley said carefully, "did you ask Noah about his mother during this session?" "I did." Coleman's voice stayed level, but I could see her hands tighten slightly around the folder. I asked him, "Where is Mommy in the picture?" Noah considered the question for a moment. Then he picked up his black crayon and drew something in the lower right corner of the page. Foley nodded to the clerk again. The image on the screen zoomed to the corner of Noah's drawing, a door. Black crayon pressed hard into the paper outline, firm and deliberate. Closed. No handle on the inside. Noah said, Coleman continued, her voice dropping just slightly, "Mommy is behind the door." The courtroom went so still I could hear the ventilation system running. Foley asked, "Did you follow up on that statement?" I asked him, "Is the door locked?" He said yes. I asked him who locked it. He looked at me and said, "Mommy always locks the doors." Coleman took a breath. He said it without distress, without anger. The way a child states a fact they have accepted as simply part of the world. I pressed my fist against my mouth. My eyes were burning so hard I had to tip my head back for a moment and breathe through it. 3 rows back in a courtroom in Portland, Oregon, a 6-year-old boy's drawing was telling the truth that no adult in his life had been willing to tell for 6 years, and he had told it in crayon in 12 lines with a locked door in the corner that had no handle on the inside. At the defense table, Diane was looking at the screen. It was the first time all trial that I had seen her composure shift, not break, not crack, but recalculate. A tiny tightening around her eyes, a micro-adjustment of her expression. Not remorse, not grief. The look of a person running numbers, reassessing odds. She looked away from the screen and wrote something on the notepad in front of her. Judge Reeves had been watching the gallery during Coleman's testimony. Now she turned her gaze to the defense table, and when she spoke, it was with the measured weight of someone who has waited the appropriate amount of time before saying the thing that needed to be said. "The court would like to note," she said, setting her pen down with a small, precise click, "that the defense's position that the minor child voluntarily preferred the attic space has just been addressed directly by the minor child himself, through the only language available to a 6-year-old. She looked at Gerald Shapiro. "Counselor, the court trusts you will be revising your approach for closing arguments." Shapiro opened his mouth, closed it, and wrote something in his own notepad. In the hallway afterward, Margaret steered me to a bench near the east exit and sat down beside me. I was holding together, but only in the way that a thing holds together right before it doesn't. "That's the whole case right there," she said quietly. Everything Foley needed Noah gave in one drawing. "What's left?" I asked. My voice was rougher than usual. "The verdict, the sentencing." She looked at me. "And the decision the judge still needs to make about you and Noah. That's the thing that matters most now, Frank. And I want you to know it's going to go the right way." She said it without drama, without performance. Just the steady certainty of a woman who had read the room correctly every day for 22 years. I nodded and let myself believe her. The morning the jury came back, I burned my toast. I was standing in the kitchen on Harlow Street, spreading butter across bread that had gone black at the edges, and my hands would not cooperate. My fingers kept fumbling, the knife kept knocking it against the counter, and I finally gave up and set the whole thing down because I realized I hadn't breathed properly in about 2 minutes. Noah padded in wearing the dinosaur slippers Carol Webb had bought him last week. He looked at the burned toast, then looked at me. "You forgot it again, Pop," he said. And his voice was matter-of-fact, the way only a 6-year-old can be matter-of-fact about a grown man falling apart at a kitchen counter. "I know, buddy." My voice came out rougher than I intended. I know I did. He climbed up onto the bar stool and pressed both small palms flat on the counter, the way he did when he was thinking hard about something. Is today the day? I had not planned to tell him what today was. I had talked to Dr. Coleman about this, about keeping the courtroom proceedings away from Noah as much as possible, letting him experience childhood rather than litigation. But Noah had been listening to everything since the day I found him. He had always listened. That was how he'd survived. Yes, I said, today is the day. He tilted his head. And then what happens? I moved around the counter and crouched down so I was at his eye level. My knees protested 70 years are 70 years, and I gripped the bar stool for balance. Then we come home, I said, and you and I make real toast without burning it. Noah reached out and tucked one little finger around mine. His grip so deliberate it made my chest ache with something I didn't have a name for yet. Okay, he said. Margaret met me outside courtroom 4 at 9:45. She had a manila folder under one arm and a coffee cup in the other hand, and she looked like a woman who had not slept more than 4 hours. I recognized the expression. I'd worn it myself 30 years ago on long shifts. They came back at 8 this morning, she said, keeping her voice low in the courthouse hallway. 11 hours of deliberation, that's a good sign. Or it means they couldn't agree on every count, I said. Margaret's mouth curved just slightly. Frank, I've been doing this for 22 years. When a jury deliberates 11 hours on 7 counts against a defendant with this level of documented evidence, she tapped the folder. That's not indecision. That's thoroughness. I pressed my palm flat against my sternum because my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. 7 counts, I said. I had the list memorized by now: child abandonment, child neglect in the first degree, 2 counts of Social Security fraud, embezzlement of a minor's trust, assets insurance fraud, and criminal mistreatment. 7 counts. 7 counts, Margaret confirmed. Go in, sit down, let me do my job. The courtroom smelled the same way it had for the past 3 weeks, old wood and recycled air, and something faintly chemical like carpet cleaner. I took my seat in the gallery 3 rows back. Detective Lisa Morgan slid in beside me and knocked her shoulder gently against mine. How are you holding up? She asked. Ask me in about 20 minutes, I said. She let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. Fair enough. Diane Calloway entered through the side door, flanked by her attorney, Gerald Shapiro. She was wearing gray again. She had worn gray every single day of the trial, and I had wondered whether that was strategy or coincidence. She sat down, and for one moment her eyes moved across the gallery and landed on me. I held her gaze. I did not look away. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my temples. She turned back to the front of the room. Judge Antoinette Reeves entered, and the bailiff called the room to order. The jury filed in 12 people who had listened to 3 weeks of testimony, who had seen Noah's drawing projected on the courtroom screen with the small black door in the corner and the words, "Mommy is behind the door. Mommy always locks the doors." Juror number 7, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, had her hands folded tightly in her lap, and was staring at a fixed point above the judge's bench. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Reeves asked. The foreperson, a heavy-set man in a plaid flannel shirt, stood. We have, Your Honor. The clerk took the folded paper. I realized my hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs and forced myself to breathe through my nose, the way I had learned at the fire academy 40 years ago, slow and steady, slow and steady. On the charge of child abandonment in the first degree, under Oregon Revised Statute 163.535, the clerk began. Guilty. The word hit the room like a stone hitting still water. On the charge of child neglect in the first degree, guilty. Margaret did not turn around, but I saw her shoulders drop exactly half an inch. On count 3 Social Security fraud, guilty. On count 4 Social Security fraud, Guilty. Morgan's hand found my forearm and gripped it, and I was grateful because my legs had gone completely soft under me. The room was very loud, and then very quiet, and then loud again somewhere behind my ears. On count 5, embezzlement of a minor's trust assets. Guilty. On count 6, insurance fraud. Guilty. On count 7, criminal mistreatment in the first degree. Guilty. 7 counts, 7 guilty verdicts. My eyes went hot and wet before I could stop them. I pressed 2 fingers against my mouth and tipped my head back and breathed in hard through my nose, trying to hold myself together in the middle of a courtroom. Morgan's hand stayed on my arm. A DA, Rachel Foley, turned from the prosecution table and gave me a small single nod. Judge Reeves scheduled sentencing for January 28th. She noted for the record that the nature of the crime's systematic deprivation of a minor over an extended period placed this case at the upper range of Oregon's sentencing guidelines. On January 28th, Diane Calloway was sentenced to 8 years in Oregon State Correctional Custody. On the same day at 2:17 in the afternoon, Judge Reeves signed the permanent guardianship order, awarding custody of Noah Daniel Carter to Frank Allen Calloway. Margaret walked me down the courthouse steps and handed me a copy of the guardianship order. My hands were still trembling when I took it. The paper shook. "It's final?" I asked, though I had just watched her sign it. "It's final," Margaret said. Her voice had gone soft for the first time in 3 weeks. "He's yours, Frank." I stood on the steps of Multnomah County Courthouse in the January cold, and I cried. Not quietly, not politely. I cried the way you cry when something you did not know you had been holding. Finally, let's go, great heaving sobs that I couldn't have stopped, even if the whole city of Portland had been watching. Margaret put one hand on my back and let me go. When I finally drove home, Noah was at the kitchen counter with Carol Webb, the two of them attempting to build something complicated out of Lego bricks. He looked up when I came through the door. "Pop," he said, "did we win?" I walked across the kitchen and gathered him up, dinosaur slippers and all, and held him against my chest. "Yeah, buddy," I managed. "We won." He patted my back 3 times very seriously and said, "Okay, now can we make the toast?" Nobody tells you how hard mornings are. I had spent 41 years as a firefighter, and then 12 more volunteering at the fire station on Burnside Avenue, and I thought I understood the meaning of the word demanding. Then Noah moved permanently into the blue bedroom at the end of the hall, and I discovered a whole new category of demanding that no amount of professional training had prepared me for. It was February, 3 weeks after the verdict, 4 days after I had finally managed to unpack the last box of Noah's belongings from the hospital discharge bag, and I was standing in the kitchen at 6:45 in the morning, staring at a YouTube video on my phone about how to make banana pancakes. "Pop." Noah was already at the bar stool watching me with those serious dark eyes. "You're holding your phone upside down." I flipped it over. "I knew that." "You didn't know that," he said, and something in the corner of his mouth twitched. "I absolutely knew that," I said, sliding flour toward myself with the exaggerated confidence of a man who had never made pancakes from scratch in his life. "I was testing you." The twitch became a tiny, careful smile. Noah did not smile easily or often. Dr. Coleman had explained this in our last session, that children who had spent years in controlled environments often learned to suppress visible emotion as a survival mechanism, because visible emotion could invite punishment. Every time Noah smiled, it felt like something borrowed from a future that hadn't quite arrived yet. "Can I help?" he asked. "You can help," I said, by not watching me too closely. He slid off the bar stool anyway and came around the counter and stood at my elbow, completely ignoring the instruction. He was wearing the planet print pajamas I'd bought at Target Saturn on the front pocket, and his hair was going in approximately 4 different directions. I had not yet mastered the morning hair situation. "My teacher says you are supposed to mix it slow," Noah offered. I stopped. "You have a teacher?" He blinked up at me. "At school." "You've been at school for 3 days, buddy. She told us on day 1 he said, completely serious. She said if you mix too fast, you get lumps. I stared at this child for a moment. This small, precise, information-absorbing child who had spent 3 years alone in a room and had come out of it with the observation skills of a forensic investigator. And my eyes went hot for a second before I blinked it back. Slow mixing, I said. Got it. Show me. The Montessori school on Southeast Belmont Street had been Margaret's recommendation. It was a converted Victorian with a garden in the back, and teachers who had apparently been briefed carefully and privately on Noah's history. On his first day, I had walked him to the front door and crouched down to his eye level and asked my voice as steady as I could make it. Are you okay? Noah had looked at the bright yellow door. He had looked at the garden visible through the side gate. He had looked back at me. It's got a door that opens, he said. Not locked. My throat closed up completely. I pressed my lips together hard and nodded because I did not trust my voice. That's good, Noah said, as if he were reassuring me rather than the other way around. Then he walked through the front door. I sat in my truck in the school parking lot for 11 minutes, crying into a McDonald's napkin I found in the glove compartment. Dr. Sarah Coleman's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Northwest 23rd. I had started my own sessions with her in February. She had suggested it gently, at the end of one of Noah's appointments, and I had agreed because I was waking up at 2 in the morning, with my heart slamming against my ribs, dreaming about a locked door. How is he adjusting? She asked at our February session. Better than I expected, I said. He asks a lot of questions, about everything. What things are called, how things work, why the sky looks different colors at sunset. Dr. Coleman made a note. That's healthy. He's making sense of a world he was largely cut off from. He made me look up how pancakes work, I said. She smiled. Good sign. I rubbed the back of my neck. He still lines things up. His crayons, his books, his shoes at the door. In order, always. That may take time, she said. The structure was his safety for a long time. He'll relax it gradually as he feels more secure. I nodded, but what I was thinking about was the notebook, the one I had found in the attic. The ruled composition notebook with don't cry, don't knock, don't shout. Be very still. I had given it to Detective Morgan as evidence, but I still saw it in my mind every single time I walked past Noah's bedroom door. Frank. Dr. Coleman's voice was careful. Are you sleeping? Some, I said. She held my gaze. We can work on that. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late February when it happened. I had picked Noah up from school, and we had stopped at the grocery store on the way home, and Noah had stood in the cereal aisle for 3 full minutes, completely overwhelmed by the number of options, before choosing a box with a cartoon toucan on it. We were back in the kitchen. I was attempting the pancakes again, the 3rd attempt that week, and Noah was sitting on the counter, something I had told him twice not to do, and was now actively enabling by not enforcing, watching the batter hit the skillet. Pop, he said. At school today, Jonas said I could sit with him at lunch. He paused. I did. I kept my eyes on the skillet because I did not want him to see my face. Yeah. Was that good? It was okay, he said. Then he has a dog. He said maybe I could come see it. I flipped the pancake. It came out golden. Finally, the first truly golden one in 3 tries, and I turned around and grinned at him, the kind of grin that probably looked slightly embarrassing on a 70-year-old man. You want to go see a dog? Noah's face cracked open into a full, wide, unguarded smile. The first one I had ever seen that had no hesitation in it whatsoever. His whole face changed when he smiled, like that eyes, crinkling chin tipping up, every bit of the careful caution falling away for one brilliant, undefended second. Yeah, he said. I kind of do. I set the spatula down on the counter and looked at this boy, my grandson, my responsibility, the person who had rebuilt something in me I hadn't known was broken. And I felt the warmth spread through my chest so completely that my eyes filled up before I could blink it back. Then we'll go see the dog, I said. He reached over and stole a piece of the golden pancake directly off the skillet with his bare hand. "Noah, it's good," he announced, mouth already full, grinning at me with his eyes. I burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle, a real laugh from somewhere deep and unexpected, the kind I hadn't had in months. Noah laughed, too startled by the sound at first, then leaning into it, his small shoulders shaking, his stolen pancake still in his hand. For a few minutes in that kitchen on Harlow Street, we were just a grandfather and his grandson making breakfast and laughing about nothing important. That was everything. I had been putting off the attic for 3 months. Every time I walked past the door at the top of the back stairs, the one with the new handle I had installed in October, the one that opened freely in both directions, I told myself I would deal with it next weekend. There were always reasons to delay. Noah needed help with a school project. The gutters needed cleaning. I needed to figure out why the dishwasher was making a sound like a small aircraft preparing for departure. But on a Saturday morning in June, with Noah at Jonah's house meeting the dog he had been talking about since February, I ran out of reasons. I brought a flashlight, 2 garbage bags, and a thermos of coffee up the stairs. The finished attic room looked different in daylight than it had in September. Emptier, quieter. The HVAC unit humming steadily in the corner, the small window on the east wall letting in a long rectangle of morning light. The Tesla Powerwall was still mounted on the far wall, its green indicator light blinking slow and even. I had never been able to look at that inverter without feeling a tightening in my ribs. I started in the corner furthest from the window, working methodically, the way I had learned to work through 41 years of clearing wreckage. I moved the folding cot frame that CPS had left behind, dragged it toward the stairs. I bagged the remaining coloring books, the ones the police had photographed, and returned. I took down the taped schedule that Noah had made himself, the one with the handwritten meal times and the single daily hour of movement. I had thought about throwing it away for months. I folded it instead and put it in my shirt pocket because I was not ready to decide about it yet. I was pulling the last piece of shelving away from the east wall when my hand hit something hard and hollow behind it. I crouched down, wedged into the gap between the shelving base and the baseboard, pushed so far back that you would only find it if you moved. The entire unit was a tin box, rectangular, about the size of a shoebox lid, scratched and dented, the kind you might buy at a craft store for a few dollars. The lid had been sealed with a strip of electrical tape, black wound twice around, and there was something written on the tape in permanent marker, in the unsteady block letters of a child who had taught himself to write. It said, "For Pop." My hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I sat down on the floor of that attic room, 70 years old, knees protesting back, objecting, and held the box in my lap for a long moment. The morning light came through the east window and sat across my hands. I pressed my lips together hard and breathed through my nose because I could already feel the pressure building behind my eyes, and I was not going to fall apart before I had even opened it. "Okay," I said out loud to no one, to the room, to the humming power wall, and the quiet walls that had kept their secrets for 3 years. "Okay." I peeled back the electrical tape. Inside the tin box, there was a small notebook, not the composition notebook, with the rules, which was in evidence storage at Central Precinct. This was a different one, smaller, the cover decorated with crayon marks in blue and green waves, and something that might have been a sun. I opened it carefully, the way you open something you know you can't unfold twice. The first page was nothing but marks. Vertical lines grouped in sets of 5, the way you count in prison tallies, the way I had seen chalked onto cell walls in old movies, and never understood until right now. Row after row after row, filling the first page completely and spilling onto the second. I turned the pages with fingers I could not make steady. Page 3, page 4, page 5. All marks, all days, Some were drawn in pencil, some in crayon, some in what looked like the dull point of a colored marker, whatever Noah had available on whatever day he had made them. I counted the pages, page after page of marks, more than 900 tallies, more than 900 days. My chest cracked open. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and squeezed my eyes shut and sat on the floor of that attic and cried until I had nothing left. Not polite crying, not controlled grief, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere below your lungs, that shakes your whole frame, that leaves you wrung out and hollow, and somehow lighter on the other side. I cried for every single one of those marks. I cried for every morning Noah had woken up in this room and made a small mark in a small notebook to prove to himself that another day had passed, that he was still here, that he was still counting. When I finally got myself back under control, and it took a while, I turned to the last page of the notebook. There was a letter, written in the same careful, unsteady block letters as the tape on the lid. The handwriting of a child who had no teacher, who had learned from the books his mother left, and the scraps of printed paper he could reach. Some letters were backward. Some words ran together. But every single one was legible. It said, "Dear Pop, if you find this, it means you came. I knew you would come because you always wave at the grass. I made marks so I would remember I was here. I am here. I am Noah. I am 6. I like the color blue and pancakes, and I do not know what a dog feels like, but I think I want to know. If you find this, please do not be sad. I am okay because I kept counting. Love, Noah." I read it 4 times. Then I folded it very carefully, tucked it into my shirt pocket next to the schedule I had taken down from the wall, and sat for a long time in the morning light, with my hand pressed flat over my heart. "I came, buddy," I said to the quiet room. "I came." Noah came home at 4:30, smelling like dog. He was through the front door before I had even reached the hallway, already talking at full volume, which was a thing he had started doing somewhere around March and had not stopped since. Dr. Coleman called it verbal decompression. I called it the best sound I had ever heard in my life. "Pop, her name is Biscuit," he announced, dropping his backpack on the floor, in the spot that was technically not the designated backpack spot, but had become the designated backpack spot through sheer repetition. "She is a golden retriever, and she licked my whole arm." "The whole arm," I said. "The whole arm," he confirmed with the gravity of a man reporting a significant geological event. He held up his right arm as evidence. "Jonah says she does it to everyone, but I think she liked me specifically." "I think that's very possible," I said. He finally looked at me properly, the way Noah looked at people when he was actually paying attention, a quick sweep from shoes to face that I had come to recognize as his version of a status check. He had developed it in the attic and kept it as a habit, and Dr. Coleman said he would probably always do it to some degree. His eyes landed on my face and stayed there. "What happened?" he said immediately. I had rehearsed this. I had sat in the kitchen for an hour before he came home, turning the words over, testing them for weight. Dr. Coleman had told me in our last session that Noah was ready for honest conversations framed in age-appropriate language, that he did not need to be protected from his own story, that he already knew most of it, and that the knowing without the talking was harder than the talking. "Come sit with me," I said. "I found something today." We sat at the kitchen table, the tin box between us. Noah's eyes went to it immediately and stayed there, and his small hands went flat on the table the way they always did when he was steadying himself. "I found this in the attic," I said, "behind the shelf. I think you put it there." He did not deny it. His chin came up slightly, and he pulled in a breath through his nose, very deliberate. "I thought maybe no one would find it," he said. "But you addressed it to me." He processed this. "I wanted someone to find it," he said. "I just didn't know if anyone would." My throat ached so badly I had to pause before I could speak again. "The marks," I said. "You counted every day, so I wouldn't forget I was there," Noah said. His voice was matter of fact, the way it always was when he talked about the attic, not flat, not suppressed, just direct in the way of a child who had processed necessity into language. If I stopped counting, I thought maybe I would stop being real. I reached across the table and covered both his hands with mine. My eyes went hot and wet immediately, and I did not try to stop it. "You were always real," I said. "Every single day." His jaw tightened the smallest amount. "I know that now," he said. "And the letter," I said. "At the end, you wrote that you knew I would come." Noah looked at the tin box for a moment, then back at me, and something in his expression shifted, a loosening like a door that had been held shut for a very long time, finally swinging on its hinges. "You always waved," he said, "every time you mowed the grass. You always waved up at the window, even when you didn't know I was there." I pressed my free hand against my mouth hard. My shoulders shook once, and I let them. Tears ran down my face, and I did not wipe them because both my hands were occupied, one holding Noah's, one pressed to my lips, and honestly, I did not want to let go of either. "I'm going to wave at that window every day for the rest of my life," I said, when I could get the words out. Noah's face broke open into that wide, unguarded smile, the one that still startled me every time, the one that had no caution in it whatsoever. "That's going to look really weird, Pop," he said. "We live here now. We'll see the window all the time." A laugh burst out of me through the tears entirely without permission. "I don't care how weird it looks." "I know," he said, grinning, now leaning forward on the table. "That's kind of why I like you." I put the tin box on the bookshelf in the living room that evening. Not hidden, not tucked away, but right there between the dictionary and the photo Carol Webb had taken of us at Noah's first school concert in May. Noah had performed a recorder solo of a song that was theoretically Hot Cross Buns and had borne almost no resemblance to it in practice, and he had taken his bow at the end with the confidence of a concert pianist. I had stood in the back of that auditorium with tears streaming down my face and Carol patting my arm going, "Oh, Frank, honestly." The tin box sat on the shelf, and I looked at it every day, and every day it meant something slightly different. Some days it meant grief. Some days it meant fury at the years that had been taken. But most days, more days than not, as spring turned into summer, it meant something I did not have a precise word for. Something close to awe. Close to the feeling you get when you realize that something small and unprotected survived conditions that should have broken it and did not break, and is sitting at your kitchen counter eating cereal and telling you at length about a dog named Biscuit. On the last Saturday in June, I was in the backyard cutting the grass when Noah appeared at the attic window. He had gone up there himself the first time he had done that voluntarily, and he was standing with both palms pressed against the glass, watching me. I stopped the mower. I looked up at the window. I waved. Noah waved back, both arms wide, grinning so hard I could see it from the yard. Then he turned and ran, and 30 seconds later, he burst through the back door and into the yard, still grinning, and grabbed my hand and said, "Come on, Pop, I want to show you something I found in Jonah's garden." I let him pull me forward into whatever came next, into all the ordinary, extraordinary days still ahead of us. The counting was done. Now we were just living. People ask me sometimes what got me through the worst of it. Honestly, I think about a line I heard once in a small church on the east side of Portland. God doesn't always spare you from the storm, but He makes sure you're still standing when it passes. I wasn't a perfect father. I trusted too easily, looked away too long, and told myself that no news meant good news. It didn't. So let me say this plainly from one ordinary person to another. Don't wait for a solar panel alert to check on the people you love. Don't assume that because a door is closed, everything behind it is fine. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Trust that feeling. Act on it. I wish I had acted sooner, and that is something I will carry for the rest of my life. What I believe now, after everything, is This a child's resilience is not an excuse for an adult's absence. Noah survived because he was extraordinary, but he should never have needed to be. If this grandpa story moved something in you, if you've ever loved a child, worried about a child, or simply needed to be reminded that one person showing up can change everything, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what stayed with you. Share this family story with someone who needs it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time, because every grandpa story on this channel is told with the same honesty you heard today, and the next one is already waiting. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. A note. Before you go, some stories ahead contain fictional elements constructed purely for storytelling and educational purposes. If that's not the content for you, no hard feelings. Step away, find what fits, and take care of yourself. For everyone else, I'll see you in the next family story.